Hello, welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Kate Harper of the 61st District in Montgomery County. October is American Archives Month. In honor of that designation, I thought it'd be great to highlight our own state archives so that viewers might learn more about this tremendous resource. In addition to housing some of the Commonwealth's most treasured historical documents, the Archives building in Harrisburg is open for citizens to research topics of interest, including their own family histories. And I'm honored today to have our own state archivist, David Carmicheal, as my guest today. He's here to highlight the collection of the Pennsylvania State Archives and to help us understand its value to all of us Pennsylvanians. Mr. Carmichael, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, as I usually do, we like to start out by letting our viewers know a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? How does one become a state archivist?
It's not easy, I've discovered. I grew up in Ohio, spent a lot of time in New York before going to Georgia as the state archivist of Georgia for about 12 years.
Did you go to college to be a history professor or something?
I was a history major.
Okay.
And when I went to graduate school, in fact, I'll tell you that when I asked my prospective father-in-law if I could marry his daughter, he said, well, what are you going to do with a history degree? And I said, sell men's clothing. What else?
Right.
I didn't know at that
What
point.
you were doing, right?
But when I went to graduate school, I discovered archives and the study of historical documents and how we preserve them to be used for modern problems and to solve modern problems and to learn about our history. So I studied archives, went to New York as an archivist, then to Georgia as the state archivist, and then finally got back up north in October of last year to lead this great archives here in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has such a wonderful history that really matters to the entire nation, and so the State Archives is a wonderful place.
Sure, I think that's probably true. This is a mother lode here.
It is, indeed.
In Pennsylvania. So what does an archivist do?
Well, if you think about your own life and the many, many records that you collect over time, you have water bills and heating bills and things like that. You have a lot of junk mail. And then you have a small percentage of documents that are really worth preserving for your entire life. Your birth certificate, if you have a marriage certificate or things like that. And what an archivist does is determines, in this case for the state government, which records need to last forever. And then we take them and preserve them forever. So it's probably about 4% of all the records that are created by the state have to be kept forever.
Okay. And then when you say preserve them, do you keep the paper copies of them or do you put them on computers or what do you do with them?
We do keep the paper copies. We are in the process of scanning many of them to make them more available online. Okay. But in most cases, we will still keep the original. We don't want to scan William Penn's 1681 charter and then get rid of it because we've got a scan of it, obviously.
Do we have William Penn's 1681 charter?
Do have William Penn's 1681 charter.
The actual thing?
The original one that Charles II gave to him that created Pennsylvania. And so we want to make records like that available to people online, but we keep the originals because they have great value as documents.
So are the state archives, I guess it's a plural, state archives, are the state archives like a museum?
Well, we do exhibits many times, but there is a state museum also.
Sure.
I kind of draw the distinction that the State Museum handles three-dimensional objects and the archives handles two-dimensional. Okay. It's not strictly true all the time, but most of the time we handle only two-dimensional items, paper, photographs, film, sort of thing. And we do exhibits from time to time. We have an exhibit normally at the State Museum going on. We have one right now. It's called What's Inside, and it tells people what's inside that big white tower that they may have seen in Harrisburg.
Okay, so if somebody wanted to come, it's about a 2-hour drive from the district to come up here, but if somebody wanted to come up and look at the state archives, could they do that?
They could do that. We are open to the public Wednesday through Saturday from 9 to 4. We do not pull original records on Saturday because it takes extra staff to go up into the tower and get the original records and bring them to people. So we only pull the originals the other times. But we have many records online that you can see in our search room. We also have about 30,000 reels of microfilm.
Wow.
And people can look at that. And on Saturday, that's what most people come to look at.
Well, you know, a lot of people are interested in their own family history. And maybe they have lived in Pennsylvania a long time. If they have a German surname, they might have been here for 300 years.
That's right.
And we have a lot of German surname people in the area. What might they find interesting in the state archives?
So many family historians come to the state archives as their starting point. We have many of our reels of microfilm are local records, not state records. So we have microfilm copies of marriage records and birth records and death records and such. We have property records that go back to William Penn. And all property in Pennsylvania ultimately traces back to records in the archives. So a lot of people come to look at property records. One of our most popular group of records is military records. And here I am going to look at a document that I've pulled, because I brought you one, in fact, that I thought you might want to see. People come for military records for a number of reasons. Often we're proving the service that the veteran had so that they can get benefits or whatever it is. This one is for someone you may know. His name was Thomas Harper, and this was his World War II bonus application.
That's my dad.
It is your dad.
Yeah.
And so we pulled that one to show you, but this is very typical of what someone will come to look for in the archives.
To find a parent or a grandparent or somebody who served.
That's right. And often these records will say who the spouse was, who the father was, the mother was. And we have excellent archivists who can help people study their family history.
Well, and I have a son who was a history major who's very interested in the Century Division, which was my dad's division in Europe. Would the state archives have something that he might be interested in?
We certainly should have something. Once you have that much information about who served and what unit they were in and such, we often have records that can sort of give more background on what they did. And also, I have a great staff, so they can point you to other places that you can go and get more information.
Oh, that's very cool. Now, you know, a lot of people are also interested in the early history of our Commonwealth and of our country. And so they might be looking for the stuff that happened in Philadelphia in 1775 and 1776 and later. Would you have anything related to that?
We certainly have. We do not have the federal records that are related to 1775 and 76. That would be in the National Archives.
Sure.
But of course, there was a lot going on in Pennsylvania at the time. We have, for instance, the Pennsylvania's 1776 Constitution, which was written right at the same time as the Declaration of Independence and served as a model for many other constitutions. It was considered the most democratic constitution ever. And so we have those sorts of records. And we have records literally from the time of William Penn up to the last governor. We have electronic records from the last governor.
So let's talk about electronic records. If I'm at home sitting around playing on the computer, can I look up the state archives?
You can. PAstatearchives.org is our website, and we offer many records online. One of my goals since coming to the state archives is to put more and more records online. And we're doing that in a couple of ways. We're doing it through partnerships with other people. So we have worked with Ancestry.com, and we have now 8 million records online.
Wow. Talk about that a little bit,
Sure.
Because I know that Ancestry.com is a very popular thing, and I was interested to see that Pennsylvania was participating with them. What was the project about?
The project was to digitize marriage records, birth records, and now military records that are in the state archives. And Ancestry provided all the labor to do this, and so it was free of charge to the state. And if you are a Pennsylvania resident, you get access to them free of charge. Even though Ancestry itself charges, they do not charge Pennsylvania residents to look at Pennsylvania records from the state archives. So as I say, we have 8 million records out there now, just mainly birth, marriage, and military records at the moment.
And that, I guess that would be, those are the big moments in someone's life.
Yeah,
and if you're looking for an ancestor or a cousin or somebody, that would be a good place to start.
Sure. They're key records because they always list antecedent ancestors. And so if you have a birth record, they're going to list the mother and father. And if you can keep going back that way, you can build your family tree that way. So those vital records and census records and such are very, very important if you're studying your family tree.
Let's talk about census records for a second. I think I've read that after a certain number of years, the detailed questions that some families answer, I guess at random, in a census are available. Is
Right.
that something the state archives would have?
That's correct. After 72 years, they are open to the public. And what happens today is that often before they're opened, they've been indexed and scanned, and they go online the day they're open to the public.
Okay.
It used to be that in years past, when the census would become open, the state archives was a place you would go to see it because you couldn't get it online. But today you can normally get those online. The census record is a very interesting record from an archivist point of view, because archivists talk about secondary value of records. And so we look at a record, like a census record, that was created for a very specific purpose. Constitution says we have to have a census so that we can redistrict, we can have the districting for the apportionment of the vote. In creating that record, in a sense, they've accidentally created a genealogical record that hundreds of years later is very, very valuable for its secondary purpose, which is as a genealogical tool. And so we look for records like that all the time.
But it's also interesting because it usually has occupational information and things like that people might be interested in trying to figure out how an ancestor lived or a village worked and lived or whatever. I mean, if they're searching their community, there are a lot of local historians whose subject of interest is the town they live in.
You can learn a great deal from those records, just what people did for a living, how much land they owned, how much taxes they paid, and you can look at who lived next to them and begin to put patterns together.
Right. I know in my own neighborhood, I noticed that a father might give a daughter, upon her marriage, either some of his own acreage or buy a farm nearby.
It's true.
And the names repeat because you name your children after yourself, I guess.
And there was a time when people married their neighbors, and you didn't get very far from home, and so you can often find family members, people marrying right next to each other, and then you trace those families in that community. It's very interesting.
So how long have you been with the Pennsylvania Archives?
Just under a year now.
Wow, that's pretty short in the world of archives.
It is.
Can you draw any conclusions about the state of the records that we have? Are we a good state for keeping track of important things or not?
I think actually Pennsylvania has been a great state for keeping track of records. I've seen other states where many records were burned or lost or dispersed in some way.
Maybe in a war. You were in Georgia. I don't know. Maybe that would happen in Georgia. Sherman's march to Atlanta could have been dangerous to a few records.
In fact, we discovered that the man who was lighting the stoves in the Capitol was using the records as fire starters. And so that was even more destructive than the war in that sense. But Pennsylvania has not had...
We got his job done.
That's right. That's right. And the one Capitol fire that we've had, the records weren't in the Capitol at the time.
Okay, great.
So we've been really blessed in that sense. New York lost all of their records in 1910 because of a fire. This is very common, but Pennsylvania has been spared that, thank heavens.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about how Pennsylvania's been spared that and where you actually physically keep the records. And if you've brought some with you, I'd like you to show me some of them.
Okay, great.
But stay with us. We'll be right back.
Did you know that Act 16 of 1999 honors one of the greatest leaders in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives? The Matthew J. Ryan Legislative Office Building, once known as the Capitol Annex, is located next to the main Capitol building and honors the late Speaker of the House, Matthew J. Ryan. Those who visit this building will observe the magnificent architectural designs providing eloquence and grandeur to the building. Known as one of the greatest members in the history of the Pennsylvania State House, Matthew Ryan started his career in the legislature in 1963 and was elected Speaker in 1981. His charisma and knowledge will forever be reflected in the building now named after this great legislative leader. Now you know.
Did you know the Avenue of Flags presentation at Indiantown Gap National Cemetery has over 500 casket flags? Among the flags displayed are Commonwealth, territorial, and military flags. The flags are tied to 20-foot poles spaced 40 feet apart on both sides of the main drive of the cemetery. It takes about 2 hours to set up and take down all of the flags. Volunteers are encouraged to help with this task and must be at least 13 years of age. All of the flags are donated to the Avenue of Flags by families of the deceased. Now you know.
Welcome back to the program. I'm State Representative Kate Harper. My guest today is State Archivist David Carmicheal. We've been talking about 300 years of records that Pennsylvania has, some of which might be of interest to you and your family, or just to you and your community, or in general to Pennsylvanians and to the United States because of Pennsylvania's key role in forming our country. Now, David, you brought some with you.
I have.
And what do you have, and what would you like to show the viewers?
All right, I have a smattering of records here,
Okay.
just to show you sort of the breadth of some of the things that we have in the archives. And this one, I always like to show people, they're normally fascinated by it, even though it looks like it's not in tremendously good shape. But this says here, if you look closely, John Harris. And this is the 1733 survey of his property where the Capitol now sits.
Oh, wow,
So
in Harrisburg.
In Harrisburg. So we can trace the Capitol property clear back to when it was first surveyed for John Harris in 1733.
Was that part of a deed, or?
It was. And we have many land records. This one is an interesting one. It was laminated many years ago, back when that was considered a great conservation technique. It's no longer considered that because it does not really preserve very well. We don't do this anymore.
So
But,
I wanted to ask you that. If somebody had, maybe their mother's marriage certificate or their father's service record or something like that, you would not recommend laminating.
Not laminating.
What would you do to preserve it?
So what we do in the archives is encapsulating. And with laminating, you're actually melting the plastic into the document.
Right, and you can't take it off.
Can't take it off. We encapsulate today, where we take inert mylar and we put tape around the outside, not touching the document.
Okay.
And we squeeze the air out and seal it up that way. And then that does preserve it. You can handle the document then, but you could just rip it apart and pull the document out if you had to later on.
Right.
So
now, some people, years ago, I think I put a letter in acid-free paper. Do they still do that?
we do that today. We always use acid-free materials because acid is a great enemy of paper. If you take your newspaper and put it in the sun and it turns brown in 3 hours, it's because of the acid in that paper.
Right.
And so we
Now, I hate to say this to an archivist, but we actually do laminate newspaper articles in our office.
Well, newspaper articles are not such a problem. Just don't do it to John Harris's deed. Please.
Don't worry,
All right?
I don't have it. What else do you have there?
Well, I brought another document. This one is a 1702 document. It's a land warrant. It's to resurvey tracts situated in the townships of Whitpains and Gwynedd. Am I pronouncing those correctly?
Yes.
All right, in Philadelphia County. So again, just an example of a very early land record where they were first doing the surveys of the tracts of land as they were laying out the lots. And this is in your district, I believe.
Yes, it
And
is.
So
Yes,
this is
it is.
an example of a very early
And
record of
Whitman
it.
Township and Lower Gwynedd have both been around for 300 years. And actually, Whitman was crisscrossed 6 times by George Washington's army. So you know they were there at the beginning.
They were.
So the name on the bottom, is that name a surveyor or a landowner?
This would have been signed by the surveyor over here. It's the parcel surveyor.
What's his name?
Oh, you asked me. Edward Shippen.
Okay.
Looks like, and then there's Thomas Story and James Logan. So there's probably more than one person signing it. But these people have the authority to say, we've laid out the tract.
And
So,
that's it. Wow. Okay, so all those who are in Bluebell, we got this.
there it is.
Right.
All right. Let me show you another one. This is I brought my notes because I don't remember all of them. This is North Wales and Montgomery Turnpike Road Company. We have a lot of records of
wow.
businesses, all right? And this was in 1869. This company was chartered. And it was in 2 parts. These are the names of the people who joined the company. They were supposed to be listed on the certificate, but there wasn't enough
shareholders,
room. Yes, they
or?
were shareholders in this Turnpike company.
Oh, and all of our local roads were turnpikes. Sumneytown Pike is
That's right.
probably this one.
That's right.
Bethlehem Pike and Germantown Pike, they're all nearby, and they were like early turnpikes.
You're right. Right, so this was just surveying that whole section. Again, I have to look at my notes here, but so this was the borough of North Wales.
And
that
this
they were
looks
actually
like
doing their work.
1869?
1869.
Okay.
And here are the names of the people who subscribed to this company. And they're pretty readable. When you get to the really early ones.
These are names that are not only readable, but also still around.
Yes, I'm
Shearer is a very common name. They had a lumber yard in North Wales. And Anders and Moyer, there are many Moyers in the area still and still live there. Lukens is another pretty common name for our area, and Erb.
So when you're looking for your family history, a lot of times it's not just adding your great-grandmother's name, but getting records like this to say, oh, that's what this person did.
Right.
And it just adds
Or
dimension.
this is what the communities were interested in back in the day. Gwynedd and North Wales cooperating on a turnpike that ran between the two.
Because if you put a good road through, you're going to bring industry and commerce through. And so people were very interested in that.
You could take the crops that were grown in the township into the borough for sale. That would make a lot of sense. That's
we
very
have many
very cool.
records on canals, railroads, things like that.
And I think, in fact, the Pennsylvania Turnpike is going to be celebrating an anniversary pretty soon.
They're having an anniversary this year.
So this would be a precursor.
It is.
Something like that.
And then finally, I wanted to bring one other document, lest you think that every document in the archives is old, because I always tell people it's not just old records. We collect any record that is permanently valuable. And here is a 1989 document of water quality analysis on Lake Galena.
In Bucks County, nearby.
And we gather reports and things like this from the state agencies, because many, many years from now, people will come back and want to see this and say, what was the data we had in those days?
Well, what's interesting about this, the thermal and water quality analysis of Lake Galena, December 1989, was at this time, there was a big fight going on about withdrawing water from this lake in Bucks County and sending it to Montgomery County, both for drinking water, which it is currently being used for, and also for the Limerick nuclear power plant.
That's right.
And Abby Hoffman came. It was a big deal. So you saved that.
We did. We have several boxes of material about this. There are two reasons we save it. One is there may come a future time when people need that data again and need to go back and say, what was the data at that time?
Maybe to say how it's changed.
That's right.
Since the pump was built.
Correct. And that happens quite frequently. The other is it's part of the history of that part of Pennsylvania. And people wanting to know the history, they can read the newspaper accounts, but they can come back to the original records and say, oh, so this is really what happened through there. So we collect even very modern records.
All right, so I want to ask you a philosophical question. You
All
spent
right.
your whole life saving these records.
That's right.
You know, not that long in Pennsylvania so far, but you were in Georgia and New York and other places taking care of records. In your view, what's the value of keeping this stuff for the future?
I think there are many values. There are very practical values where people need information that was gathered long ago, and we need to know how things changed or how did we react to this a long time ago. One of the things that people were looking for recently in the archives was a report on the avian flu in 1980, because we're experiencing it again. And they wanted to know, how did we deal with it in 1980 when it hit? And so, because the archives exist, we had a copy of these things, because we foresee that this is going to happen from our training. And so we collect things like that people will need later on. But just like a family, records are your memory. And so we keep records that are the memory of Pennsylvania, great events that happened here, good events, bad events. We have records on 3 Mile Island, for instance, and we have records on the Civil War and on Gettysburg and the American Revolution and such.
Oh, we have an awful lot of people interested in the Civil War in Pennsylvania.
That's right. I've noticed. They were in Georgia too, but for different reasons, I find.
That was the War of Northern Aggression?
Well, that's what they called it anyway. So there are many reasons to gather these. What I've noticed over the years of doing this, 30 years of doing this, is that archives have very, very practical uses. And people come to prove something, prove that they were in the military so that they can get a benefit, prove that they taught in this particular school so they can get a benefit. We had someone recently who had to prove that he was diagnosed as a child with cerebral palsy. and he couldn't prove it until he came to the archives, and we had records that actually proved when his diagnosis was made.
I guess his childhood doctor might be gone.
That's right.
But your records are still here.
That's right. So very practical uses for these materials.
All right, so would you advise people that it's a good place to visit, or what should they do? Do they make an appointment? And where is the building, and how do you keep all this stuff straight?
Okay, I can't answer that last question. That would take too long. The building is in Harrisburg. It's at 350 North Street. It's right next to the State Museum. So the museum is the round building. The State Archives is the tall, tall tower with no windows. Easy to find in that sense.
Okay. Protected from fire, certainly.
Certainly protected from everything, we hope, in there.
I don't know. One time that I'm aware of, Harrisburg had a flood. I think it was Hurricane Agnes.
True.
A long time ago. I don't know whether the water got that far or not.
Did not. The building is above the floodplain, thankfully.
Okay, good.
So that's not been a problem. We are open 9 to 4, Wednesday through Saturday. No appointment necessary. Just walk in. We really urge people, if you're interested in your family or the history of your community or the history of your home or something, come and talk to us. If you're traveling a great distance, as people watching this show might be,
right,
give us a call in advance or email us, and we'll tell you what we think you can find before you make that drive. And we are trying to get more records online so that people don't have to make that drive, if at all possible. So we welcome people to come.
All right, that's good. Now, I have another question for you. You know, you have all these documents. I mean, you have the original charter from King Charles to William Penn.
That's right.
Does it get old? I mean, does it like, oh, it's just a piece of paper because you have it?
It's funny because to me, whenever it starts getting routine, I stumble on something that I wasn't expecting.
Okay.
And I walked down the hallway one day and I looked at the diary that was kept when the Lincoln conspirators were in prison after the assassination of Lincoln and before they were executed. And we have the diary of the prison commandant. And I read through it, not entirely, but just a few pages through it. And I went back to my office and I thought, how many people get to do something like this in their career, where I can go straight down the hallway and see something like that? So whenever it starts getting routine, I always see something that gets me excited again.
Oh, I think you've given a good advertisement for the Pennsylvania State Archives, and I think many of the viewers will want to see it. So let's just go over some of the big things because we just have a little bit of time left. You have Pickett's Charge photo.
We have drawings of Pickett's Charge that were made for paintings and such, and we have some photographs of the reenactment of Pickett's Charge during the 75th anniversary.
Okay.
At Gettysburg.
Because that's another popular thing.
It's a great thing.
All right, I think that's all the time we have for today's program, but it's been a pleasure having you here, and I'm State Representative Kate Harper. If you need assistance with any state government matter, please contact me at my local office. The address and number will be shown in just a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join me again for Legislative Report.